Catherine Rourke's world was one of controlled pressure, a hermetically sealed environment of glass, steel, and filtered air 60 stories above the city. Her office was a testament to minimalist power. A single slab of black marble served as her desk, holding nothing but a sleek monitor and a keyboard that clicked with quiet, expensive authority. The city sprawled below, a complex organism of traffic and commerce that she viewed as a system to be optimized, its inefficiencies to be excised. She did not see people, she saw human resources, assets, and liabilities. On this particular Tuesday, the liability was a man named Peterson, a vice president of logistics whose face was progressively losing color under her unblinking gaze. "Explain it to me again, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice a low, precisely calibrated instrument of disappointment. She did not raise it. She never raised it. Shouting was inefficient, a waste of energy that betrayed a lack of control. "Explain how a 3% deviation in our supply chain efficiency is an acceptable quarterly outcome." "It was the port congestion in Singapore, Ms. Rourke," Peterson stammered, his hands twisting a pen that looked as if it might snap. "And the unexpected tariff adjustments. It was a confluence of external factors beyond our." "External factors," she repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She swiveled her chair slightly to face the panoramic window. "The world is made of external factors, Peterson. It is a chaotic system. Our purpose, the very reason for Vertex Innovation's existence, is to impose order upon that chaos for the benefit of our shareholders. Your job is to anticipate, to model, to mitigate. Your job is not to come into my office and present a list of excuses as if they were accomplishments." Her assistant, Marcus Thorne, stood by the door, a silent, impeccably dressed fixture. He held a tablet, his expression neutral, but his eyes recorded everything. He had seen this scene play out a dozen times. Rourke did not tolerate failure, and she defined failure as anything less than her own aggressive projections. She saw the company not as a collection of people, but as a machine. Any part that did not perform to her exact specifications was not to be repaired, it was to be replaced. Peterson, with his talk of external factors, was a faulty cog. "We have a board meeting on Friday," she continued, turning back to him. The brief moment of looking away had been a calculated move, allowing his anxiety to ripen. "By then, I expect a revised strategy on my desk. A strategy that does not involve blaming the tide. I want a plan that guarantees we claw back that 3% and add another 2 by the end of next quarter. Is that understood?" "Yes, Ms. Rourke." "Absolutely." "Good. You can go." Peterson practically fled the room. Marcus did not move. Rourke took a sip of water from a glass that was as clear and sterile as her worldview. "Marcus," she said, not looking at him. "Put a flag on Peterson's file. Begin compiling a list of potential replacements. Internal and external." "Yes, Ms. Rourke," he replied, his stylus making a faint scratching sound on the tablet's screen. "And schedule a full departmental review of logistics. I want every redundancy, every legacy process, every underperforming asset identified. We are going to streamline. We will cut the fat until this company is nothing but bone and muscle." Her gaze drifted back to the city below, a chessboard waiting for its master. 58 floors below, in the windowless, humming heart of the building's server maintenance division, Elias Vance was imposing a different kind of order. His world was not one of marble and glass, but of raised floors, neatly bundled fiber optic cables, and the steady, reassuring drone of cooling fans. He sat on a low rolling stool before an open server rack, his laptop balanced on his knees. His screen was a cascade of monochrome text, a language only a handful of people in the entire company could still read fluently. He was debugging a segment of the company's original Genesis platform, a foundational piece of software so old and convoluted that most of the younger engineers were terrified of it. To them, it was a black box. To Elias, it was a familiar, logical landscape. He wore a faded flannel shirt, its cuffs rolled to his elbows, and steel-toed work boots. His desk in the nearby cubicle farm was Spartan but organized. A single framed photograph was its only personal touch, a woman with a warm, laughing smile and a young girl with missing front teeth, both of them squinting in the bright sun of a long-ago beach trip. Elias's fingers moved with an unhurried, deliberate grace across the keyboard. He wasn't typing frantically, he was placing each command with the precision of a watchmaker setting a jewel. A younger technician had spent 3 days trying to solve a persistent data corruption bug, failing and growing increasingly frustrated. Elias had been looking at it for 20 minutes. He saw the problem not as a bug, but as a logical fallacy, a place where the code's original intent had been misinterpreted by years of patches and clumsy updates. He found the loop, a tiny, elegant piece of flawed reasoning. He rewrote 3 lines of code. He compiled it. He ran the diagnostic. The stream of error messages vanished, replaced by a clean, steady string of affirmative system checks. Done, he said, to no one in particular. He closed his laptop and rolled his stool back to its designated spot. He checked the clock on the wall. 4:45. 15 minutes to pack up, to transition from the world of legacy code to the world that mattered. His drive home was a familiar ritual, a slow decompression from the artificial chill of the server room to the warmth of his small, tidy house in a quiet suburb. The house was modest, but the lawn was perfectly edged and the garage was a sanctuary of order, every tool hanging in its proper place. He was not just a software architect, he was a builder, a man who understood how things fit together, whether they were made of code or of wood and steel. At 5:32, he pulled into the driveway. A moment later, the front door opened and his daughter, Lily, ran out to meet him. She was 8 years old, with her mother's serious eyes and his own quiet intensity. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around his legs and held on. He rested his hand on her head, the day's tension melting away under the familiar weight. "How was school?" he asked, his voice softer than the one he used at work. "We learned about binary stars," she said, looking up at him. "2 stars that are stuck together forever." "Sounds crowded," he said with a small smile. Inside, they worked on their current project, a massive Lego model of a Saturn V rocket. It lay on a dedicated table in the living room, a complex scaffold of white and black plastic. Lily was the parts master, her small fingers deftly sorting through the pile of bricks and finding the exact piece he needed before he even asked for it. He was the assembler, following the thick instruction booklet with the same methodical focus he applied to code. They worked in comfortable silence, the only sounds the soft click of plastic bricks locking into place. This was his system, the one he had built after the chaos. This was the order that mattered. Later that week, David Chin came over for dinner. David had been Elias's office mate and closest friend during the glory days at Vertex, back when it was a scrappy innovator and not a corporate leviathan. David had left to get a law degree and now ran his own small firm specializing in intellectual property. He was sharp, energetic, and perpetually worried that Elias was squandering his talent. "I saw Vertex's stock took a little dip," David said, spearing a piece of chicken from the pan Elias was holding. "Rourke probably fired half a department to make the numbers look better for the quarterly report." "Probably," Elias said, noncommittally. He was focused on getting the precise amount of seasoning on the potatoes. "You know, I filed a patent for a client last week," David continued, leaning against the counter. "A new type of routing algorithm for logistics networks. They're getting series of funding. The lead engineer is 26. He thinks he's reinvented the wheel." I looked at his documentation. "It's a clumsy imitation of the predictive modeling you built into the Genesis core. The one you patented." Elias just shrugged, transferring the potatoes to a baking sheet. "Good ideas get rediscovered." "That's not the point, Eli. The point is, your name is on 7 of the foundational patents that Vertex is still licensing for millions of dollars a year. You were the lead architect of a platform that changed the industry. And now you spend your days patching security holes for a manager who probably thinks SQL is a type of car." "My manager is fine. And the hours are good. I'm home every day at 5:32, Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. He glanced into the living room where Lily was reading a book, her feet tucked under her. "That's the metric I care about." David's expression softened. He knew the story. He had been there through the before and the after. He had been a pallbearer at Anna's funeral. He had watched Elias, the brilliant, driven systems architect who could work for 36 hours straight on pure caffeine and inspiration, methodically dismantle that life. After his wife's sudden death from an aneurysm, Elias had resigned from his high-pressure senior position, taking a significant pay cut for a lower-level maintenance role that came with no travel, no late nights, and no corporate ladder to climb. He had traded ambition for presence. He had chosen to be a father, first and foremost. I know, David said gently. I get it. I really do. But Lily's getting older. The world is changing. I just hate to see that brain of yours running on idle. You have ideas, Eli. I remember the whiteboards. The late nights. What about that compression project? The one you called Chrysalis? A shadow of something passed over Elias's face, a flicker of the old fire. It was a theoretical framework. Promising, but unfinished. Unfinished because Vertex acquired that other company and shelved all non-essential R&D, David corrected him. It's still sitting there, isn't it? The code. In that old server farm they keep in the sub-basement. The Orion cluster, Elias said, the name coming easily to his lips. And yes. It's still there. But the hardware is obsolete. It's a ghost in a rusty machine. A ghost that could be worth a fortune, David pressed. If you ever want to resurrect it, if you ever want to build something for yourself again, you call me. I'll handle the legal. I'll find the seed money. Just say the word. Elias looked from his friend to his daughter, and then at the simple, ordered kitchen around him. He had made his choice. He had built a fortress of routine to protect the one thing that mattered. He had no desire to invite the chaos of the outside world back in. I appreciate it, David. But I'm good. In her 60th floor office, Catherine Rourke was presiding over her departmental review, the one designed to trim the fat. The heads of various divisions sat around a long conference table, each presenting their plans for optimization. The air was thick with corporate jargon, synergy, leveraging, right-sizing. It was a language of abstraction, designed to distance the speakers from the human consequences of their decisions. The head of IT, a nervous man named Harris, was presenting his slide deck. It was filled with charts and graphs detailing server capacity, energy consumption, and hardware lifecycle costs. Rourke's eyes scanned the numbers, her mind a relentless calculator seeking out waste. This line item, she said, pointing a slender finger at the projection on the wall. Sub-basement 3. The Orion cluster. What is its current function? Harris cleared his throat. Well, Ms. Rourke, it's not in active production. It's a legacy system. It houses some of our archival data and a few deprecated development environments from the early Genesis days. And its operational cost. It's minimal, relatively speaking. Power and cooling, mostly. About $50,000 a year. Rourke's expression was one of profound distaste, as if she had discovered mold on a piece of expensive fruit. $50,000 a year to power a museum exhibit. It serves no function. It generates no revenue. It is a liability. Why has it not been decommissioned? Harris shifted in his seat. There was some concern about the proprietary data on the drives. Some of the original framework code. It's a complex process to ensure a secure wipe and disposal. Then simplify the process, Rourke said, her voice sharp. I don't care about legacy junk from a decade ago. It's digital rust. Get a disposal vendor. Have them pull the racks, shred the drives, and sell the chassis for scrap metal. I want that $50,000 liability off our books by the end of the month. Understood. Yes, Ms. Rourke, Harris said, making a frantic note. The decision had been made in less than 30 seconds. A piece of company history, the very hardware on which its foundational software had been born, was now officially garbage. The news of the decommissioning traveled through the IT department's internal channels like a quiet shockwave. To most, it was just another cost-cutting measure, another piece of the old company being swept away. But to Elias, the email announcement was a lightning bolt. The Orion cluster. Chrysalis. The code was still there. An idea, dormant for years, began to stir. He thought of David's words. He looked at the picture on his desk. Anna had always been the one to push him, to believe his craziest ideas were possible. He spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet, intense deliberation. He mapped it out in his head. The risks. The costs. The potential. But most of all, the opportunity. It was more than just money. It was a chance to finish something. To prove a theory he knew in his bones was right. To build one last, truly elegant thing. He made a call to David. What would it take to acquire surplus corporate assets, he asked, his voice low. David was silent for a moment. Eli. Are you serious? The Orion cluster. Just a hypothetical. It depends on how they classify it, David said, his voice now buzzing with energy. If it's scrap, you could get it for pennies on the dollar. If they classify it as a depreciated asset, it might be more. You'd need to make a formal offer through their disposal channels. Let me look into who handles their asset liquidation. Elias knew a formal offer would get bogged down in red tape. He knew the cluster better than anyone. He needed to verify the integrity of the core data drives himself before he made any move. If the specific platters containing the chrysalis fragments were corrupted, the whole endeavor was pointless. That night, he stayed late. This was unusual for him, and it felt like a transgression against the careful order of his life. He called the after-school program and told them he'd be an hour late picking up Lily, a knot of guilt tightening in his stomach. He descended to the sub-basement, a place few employees ever went. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and dust. The Orion cluster stood in the corner, a series of hulking black monoliths, their indicator lights dark. They were silent, sleeping giants. He unlocked the maintenance panel on the primary rack, the one he knew housed the key development drives. He plugged in his diagnostic tablet, its screen providing the only light in the dim room. He wasn't stealing data, he was simply running a low-level integrity check, a series of commands that would verify the magnetic health of the platters without accessing the files themselves. The process was slow, methodical. He was so focused, so lost in the familiar flow of the diagnostics, that he didn't hear the hum of the elevator or the soft click of expensive shoes on the concrete floor. What is going on here? The voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold. Elias spun around, startled. Catherine Rourke stood there, flanked by her assistant, Marcus. She had been doing one of her infrequent, unannounced late-night walkthroughs, a tactic she used to keep her managers on edge. Her eyes, accustomed to the curated perfection of her office, narrowed with contempt as she took in the scene, the dusty, decommissioned hardware, the open panel, the employee on his knees with a tangle of wires. I asked you a question, she said. Elias stood up slowly. Ms. Rourke. I'm Elias Vance, from IT Maintenance. I was just running a final diagnostic check on this hardware before it's scrapped. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. Rourke's gaze was dismissive. She didn't know who he was, and she didn't care. He was just a component, and he was out of place. A diagnostic on equipment that has been slated for destruction. Is that a productive use of your time, Mr. Vance? Are you being paid to play with garbage? I believe the data on these drives has potential value, Elias said, his voice even. I wanted to ensure it wasn't being discarded without a proper assessment. Rourke let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a dry, unpleasant sound. Potential value. This is obsolete junk. Its only value is the pittance we'll get for the scrap metal. You are wasting company time and resources on a personal pet project. That is tantamount to theft. She turned to Marcus. What is our policy on insubordination and misuse of company assets? Marcus looked deeply uncomfortable. He glanced at Elias, then back at his boss. Immediate termination is within managerial discretion, Ms. Rourke. Then I am exercising my discretion, she said, her eyes locking on Elias. The decision was as swift and impersonal as her order to scrap the servers. Mr. Vance, your employment with Vertex Innovations is terminated, effective immediately. Marcus will escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects. You will then be escorted from the building. Elias stood frozen for a moment, the shock of it washing over him. Fired. For this. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. But then, a strange calm settled over him. An opportunity, born from her blind arrogance. Fine, he said. And then he played his only card. In that case, I'd like to purchase the equipment. Rourke stared at him as if he had just started speaking in tongues. You want to buy the garbage you were just fired for tampering with? Yes, Elias said. You're scrapping it anyway. I'll take it off your hands. It will save you the disposal fee. The sheer absurdity of the request seemed to amuse her. It was a final confirmation in her mind that this man was a nobody, a tinkerer with no sense of value. She saw it as a final, petty victory. She would not only fire him, she would let him saddle himself with the very junk that had cost him his job. She gave a theatrical shrug. Fine. Sell it to him, Marcus. Let him have the junk. She turned to her assistant. What's the scrap value? $1,000. Probably less, once you factor in transport costs, Marcus said quietly. Whatever, she waved a dismissive hand. Draw up a bill of sale. $1. As is, where is? He arranges transport. I want it, and him, out of this building by morning. She turned and walked away without a backward glance, her heels clicking with finality on the concrete. The fate of $100 million idea had just been sealed for the price of a candy bar. Marcus looked at Elias, a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or even respect, in his eyes. He typed up the agreement on his tablet. Elias signed it. The transaction was complete. He was unemployed. But he owned the ghost in the machine. The next 24 hours were a blur of controlled logistics. Elias called David, whose initial shock quickly turned to exhilaration. She just gave it to you. For $1. Eli, this is the most lopsided deal in the history of corporate acquisitions. David handled the legal paperwork, making sure the bill of sale was ironclad and filed correctly. Elias rented a truck and hired a specialized moving crew accustomed to handling delicate electronics. He cashed out a portion of his modest savings to pay for it, and to rent a secure, climate-controlled unit at a large storage facility, a clean, anonymous space that would become his laboratory. He supervised the move himself, ensuring each heavy server rack was carefully padded and loaded, his hands guiding the movers with a quiet authority that they instinctively respected. As he worked, he made a difficult call to Lily's school, arranging for her to stay in the after-school program for the rest of the week. The guilt was a physical weight, but it was a necessary sacrifice. By the time the last rack was unloaded into the stark white room, he was exhausted but resolute. He stood for a long moment in the silence, looking at the silent black towers. They were his now. He felt a profound sense of ownership he had never felt for any work he had done for Vertex. He powered them up one by one. The hum of the fans filled the room, a sound of resurrection. He connected his laptop and began the delicate process of accessing the fragmented code of the Chrysalis project. It was all there. Years of dust and neglect had not touched the pristine logic of the data. The core algorithm, the elegant, revolutionary set of instructions for data compression he had conceived all those years ago, was intact. A wave of relief and triumph washed over him. Rourke had thrown away the map to a gold mine. He had just paid $1 for it. He knew he couldn't do it alone. The next morning, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to Maria Flores, a hardware genius who could coax life out of ancient motherboards and failing power supplies. The second was to Ben Carter, a meticulous software quality assurance expert who could spot a flaw in 1,000,000 lines of code. Both had been victims of Rourke's streamlining months earlier and were now working freelance, underutilized and frustrated. He met them at a coffee shop. He didn't make a grand speech. He simply laid out the facts. I have the original Orion cluster. And I have the complete, unfinished code for the Chrysalis compression framework. I think we can finish it. I can't pay you a salary, not yet. But I can offer you equity in whatever we build. Maria and Ben exchanged a look. They had both worked with Elias before. They knew his reputation. They knew he was not a man given to exaggeration. They trusted his skill more than they had ever trusted a corporate mission statement. I'm in, Maria said, without hesitation. I'd rather build something real in a garage than optimize ad clicks for another soulless startup. Me too, Ben agreed. When do we start? The storage unit became their headquarters. They worked with a quiet, focused intensity. The days fell into a rhythm dictated by the work itself. Maria meticulously disassembled each server, cleaning components, replacing swollen capacitors, and rerouting power to bypass failing systems. She worked with the loving care of an archaeologist restoring a priceless artifact. Ben began the painstaking process of building a modern testing environment that could interface with the archaic code, writing thousands of lines of diagnostic scripts. Elias was the architect, the heart of the operation. He immersed himself in the Chrysalis code, rediscovering its intricate pathways, remembering the flashes of insight that had led to its creation. The algorithm was based on a novel form of predictive pattern recognition, inspired by the way language works. It didn't just compress data, it learned its structure and compressed the structure itself. It was a fundamentally different approach from anything else on the market. He worked with a discipline that bordered on monastic. He would arrive at the storage unit before dawn, work for hours in a state of pure concentration, then leave promptly at 4:45 to pick up Lily. His evenings were for her, for homework, for dinner, for the Saturn V rocket, which was now nearing completion. After she was asleep, he would often open his laptop and work for another few hours, refining a function, chasing down a mathematical proof. He was more tired than he had ever been, but he was also more alive. Lily was his anchor, the fixed point around which this new, chaotic world revolved. She would sometimes come to the storage unit on weekends, sitting quietly in a corner and drawing in her sketchbook while the three adults worked around her. She called the humming servers Daddy's new stars. There were setbacks. A critical power supply unit failed, and Maria had to spend a week scouring online forums to find a rare replacement part in Estonia. A key data library was more corrupted than they realized, and Ben and Elias had to spend days painstakingly rebuilding it from fragmented backups. But they met each challenge with quiet ingenuity, not drama. There were no managers to appease, no deadlines imposed from above. There was only the problem, and the work required to solve it. After 3 months of relentless effort, they had a breakthrough. Elias solved the final core equation, the key to making the predictive model work at scale. He typed the last line of code, his fingers feeling a strange sense of finality. He hit compile, the code ran. It was clean. Ben, he said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of excitement. Run the benchmark. Ben initiated the standard industry test suite, feeding the Chrysalis algorithm a massive, varied data set, text, images, video, raw database files. They watched the progress bar on the screen. The numbers that began to appear were staggering. Compression ratios of 50:1, 70:1, even 100:1 on certain file types, all of it completely lossless. Nothing on the market came close to a tenth of that efficiency. Maria let out a low whistle. Eli, is that real? Elias nodded slowly, a rare, wide smile spreading across his face. It's real. They had done it. In a dusty storage unit, with discarded hardware, they had built something extraordinary. The ghost in the machine was alive. David Chen was not easily impressed, but when Elias showed him the benchmark results, he stared at the screen in stunned silence for a full minute. Eli, do you understand what this is? This isn't just an improvement. This is a paradigm shift. This will change the economics of data storage for the entire planet. Cloud providers, media companies, military contractors, they will kill for this. He moved quickly. He incorporated Chrysalis dynamics and filed a volley of patents to protect every aspect of the new technology. Then, he leveraged his contacts, bypassing mid-level engineers and going straight to the top. He arranged a private, confidential demonstration for the chief technology officer of a company called Arian Data, Vertex's largest and most aggressive competitor. The demonstration was held in a secure lab at Arian's campus. Elias, looking out of place in a borrowed blazer, calmly explained the architecture of his algorithm. Arian's top engineers were skeptical, their arms crossed. Then, Ben ran the demo on their own proprietary data. The room went silent as the results appeared on the large screen. The CTO walked up to the monitor, staring at the numbers as if he couldn't believe them. He had his team run the test again, on a different data set. The results were the same. The CTO turned to Elias. His expression was one of pure avarice. What do you want for it? He asked, his voice low. David stepped in. My client is open to discussing an exclusive licensing deal, or a potential acquisition. The negotiations were swift and brutal. Arian knew they had found a weapon that could cripple their competitors, chiefly Vertex. They didn't want to license it, they wanted to own it. David, armed with a technology that was demonstrably 50 times better than anything else in existence, held all the cards. The initial offer was $50 million. David laughed and almost walked out. The final offer, tendered 2 days later, was for $100 million in cash and stock for the complete acquisition of Chrysalis Dynamics. Elias, Maria, and Ben signed the papers in David's small, functional office. There was no champagne. There was no celebration. There was just a quiet sense of disbelief and profound, bone-deep satisfaction. Elias looked at the final document, his name listed as the majority shareholder. He thought of his $1 bill of sale. He thought of Catherine Rourke's condescending smile. The news broke on a Wednesday morning, landing like a bomb in the technology world. A major trade publication ran it as their lead story, under a headline that sent shockwaves through the industry. Arian Data acquires startup Chrysalis Dynamics for $100 million in landmark compression tech deal. Secretive company helmed by former Vertex architect Elias Vance. Catherine Rourke was in a budget meeting when her phone buzzed with a priority alert from her PR department. She glanced at it, annoyed at the interruption. She saw the headline. She saw the name, Arian, her main rival, and the number, $100M, then she saw the other name, Elias Vance. It was vaguely familiar, a minor detail logged somewhere in her memory. It annoyed her that she couldn't immediately place it. Marcus, she said, her voice tight. Pull the personnel file for an Elias Vance. Former employee. Yes, Ms. Rourke, Marcus said, already typing on his tablet. He had seen the article too, and a cold dread was beginning to pool in his stomach. He remembered the dusty sub-basement. He remembered the quiet, defiant men. He remembered typing the termination notice himself. He found the file. His blood ran cold. He opened another file, Asset Disposal Records. There it was. Bill of sale number 734. Seller, Vertex Innovations. Buyer, Elias Vance. Item 1, lot of decommissioned server hardware, designated Orion cluster, price, $100. The authorization signature at the bottom was clear and sharp, C. Rourke. Marcus felt his carefully constructed professional composure begin to crumble. He understood. He saw the entire, catastrophic chain of events with perfect, horrifying clarity. The legacy junk. The fired employee. The $1 sale. The $100 million acquisition. It all connected. She hadn't just misjudged a minor employee, she had personally handed their biggest competitor the keys to the kingdom out of sheer, unadulterated hubris. He walked back into the conference room, his footsteps heavy. The other executives fell silent, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He placed the tablet on the marble table in front of Catherine Rourke. On the screen, he had displayed 3 documents side by side, Elias Vance's termination letter, the $1 bill of sale for the Orion cluster, and the news article announcing the acquisition. Rourke looked down. She read the documents. Her face, usually a mask of controlled composure, went utterly blank for a moment. Then, a faint tremor started in her hands. The color drained from her cheeks. Disbelief warred with a sickening, rising tide of comprehension. She traced the signature on the bill of sale with her finger, as if to confirm it was her own. This can't be, she whispered, the words barely audible. But it was. The truth was there, laid out in undeniable black and white. The legacy junk she had dismissed with a wave of her hand was the foundation of a 9-figure technology. The quiet maintenance worker she had fired for his pet project was the architect of the technology. She hadn't just lost an opportunity, she had created a monster for her competition and armed it herself. The $50,000 a year she had been so proud of saving had cost her company, and her reputation, a fortune. Her carefully constructed world of control and efficiency had been shattered by a single, colossal error in judgment, an inability to see value when it was wearing a flannel shirt instead of a tailored suit. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. The fallout at Vertex was brutal and swift. The board of directors convened an emergency session. The story had already leaked to the financial press, and the narrative was devastating. Vertex's CEO had fired a brilliant engineer and then sold him the core technology for a revolutionary new product for $1. The company's stock plunged 17% in a single day. An internal investigation was launched, but it was a mere formality. Catherine Rourke's position was untenable. She was asked to tender her resignation. Her reign, built on the illusion of ruthless efficiency, had been undone by it. Peterson, the logistics VP she had threatened to fire, outlasted her. Elias Vance was, for a brief time, an object of intense media fascination. He turned down all interview requests. He had no interest in telling his story or gloating over Rourke's downfall. Her fate was an abstraction to him, a secondary consequence. His goal had never been revenge, it had been completion. His life did not change dramatically, but it settled into a new, more stable orbit. He set up a trust for Lily that would ensure a future 100 times over. He, Maria, and Ben were retained by Arian as consultants, but on their own terms, with full autonomy. With a portion of his new wealth, Elias established a new, independent research and development lab. He called it simply Chrysalis. He bought a small, unassuming industrial building on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place you would drive by without a second glance. It had been a machine shop once. He had the interior completely renovated, turning it into a state-of-the-art laboratory, but kept the exterior plain and simple. He hung a small, clean sign by the door with the single word on it. There was no innovations or dynamics, the work would speak for itself. He hired a handful of the best engineers he knew, many of them, like Maria and Ben, former Vertex employees who had been cast aside for not fitting the corporate mold. He created an environment based not on metrics and deadlines, but on curiosity and the pursuit of elegant solutions. One Saturday morning, months later, he brought Lily to the new lab. The server racks that had once been the Orion cluster now formed the core of Chrysalis's new research network, their fans humming a quiet, powerful tune. They were clean, upgraded, and surrounded by gleaming new equipment, but they were the same machines. "These are your new stars, Daddy?" Lily asked, looking up at the blinking green lights. "They are," Elias said, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They're helping us find new patterns. New ways of putting things in order." He was not a corporate titan. He was not an icon of industry. He was the same quiet, methodical man he had always been. He had faced down a world that valued surface over substance, status over skill, and he had won simply by continuing to do good work. His victory was not in the millions of dollars, or in the fall of his adversary. It was here, in the quiet hum of the machines, in the freedom to build, and in the certain knowledge that he would be home by 5:32, every single day. He had found his own binary star system, a life of brilliant work and devoted fatherhood, stuck together forever, in perfect, unbreakable balance.